So if you can, oh, also this is being recorded and it'll eventually be shared with students. But yeah, so I want to get introductions out of the way. So for the panelists, if you could please share your name, your pronouns, your Yale affiliation, and what organization, groups, or movements you are currently a part of or have previously been involved with. And the first person I'll call on is Janice.
Hello, my name is Janice Jin. I use she, her pronouns, and I graduated from Yale undergrad in May 2020. I live in New York now, and I work for an immigrants' rights legal aid organization called the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project. At Yale, I was involved with the Asian American Cultural Center, Asian American Studies Task Force. I did some stuff around ethnic studies at Yale. I think that's it.
Great, thanks so much, Janice. The next person is Joshua.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Aiken. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm in my third year at Yale in a JD PhD program in history and African American studies. And currently I'm the co-convener of the Racial Capitalism and the Carceral State Working Group, which is a group of graduate students focusing on scholar activism as it relates to anti-capitalist work and work related to mass criminalization in the United States. Before I was at Yale, I was at the Prison Policy Initiative, which is an organization that does work on mass criminalization in the States as well as it applies to prisons, jails, and detention centers. And I'm also involved in an organization called Black and Pink, which connects LGBTQ folks who are incarcerated with folks in the free world in a pen pal program. And that's been something that has been really wonderful to connect with other Yale students who are doing that pen pal program as well.
Thanks so much, Josh. And last but certainly not least, Tiggy.
Hey guys, I'm Tiggy. I'm a junior. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior in the Anthro major. I'm also in the Human Rights program and in the Carey Fellowship program. And I'm most heavily involved with Black Students for Disarmament at Yale. I'm one of the directors, and we have 4 major demands, but the overarching demand being to abolish the private and militarized Yale Police Department.
Great, thanks so much. And again, I really, really, really want to share my extreme gratitude for the 3 panelists who are here with us today. This discussion is very much so an open conversation on civic engagement and more specifically student activism at Yale. We will be touching major themes, but some of them include just wellness overall and in terms of balancing student life activist identity, but also being a student at Yale and being an individual. So to that note, for the first question that I have for the panelists, it's just, what does activism at Yale actually look like? Do you believe there's only one way that a student can be involved in activism? And this is open to any of the 3 panelists.
I feel that was a leading question. No, there's certainly not one way to be involved in student activism at Yale. I think any kind of college campus, you have both the luxury and the complications that come with very organized and institutionalized centers and organizations and groups. I found that to be like the main way that I engaged in social and political and cultural issues while I was at Yale. And I certainly also think that there are drawbacks to that kind of structure as well, and I'm sure maybe we'll talk about that later, but I'm eager to hear from Josh and Tiggy too.
Yeah, I can just say my own experience and then a little bit about my experience in undergrad, which was in St. Louis, but I think maybe speaks a little bit to what it looks like to do activist work on a college campus. And just to echo that there's not one way, and that I think it's really important that there's not one way to be engaged in student activism. And one of the things that I think is important is for folks who are trying to figure out what that looks like, spending time to figure out what one's strengths are, and then also learning from other students what the landscape looks like, and understanding, as was being said, the different organizations and centers and ways that advocacy is taking place within the university, and then also getting a lay of the land in terms of New Haven, and understanding that there's going to be a full spectrum of ways to engage, but learning about what those are, and I think learning kind of what's happening in terms of intervening at different points. And hopefully we'll get to talk about that more, but I think it's just important to say that there is a number of different ways to engage in activist work.
Yeah, I think Janice and Josh have summed it up like pretty perfectly. I think maybe something I'd add is, I think we might get into it later, just like the question of performativity, especially as it like pertains to these very elite college campuses. And the way I've sort of been going about it is that, to me at least, activism involves some stakes, I think, for you personally. And that could be many different things. It could be like producing a piece of art, but like the stakes are that like people might not like it, you know what I mean? Or like it might cause controversy, or like you write an op-ed, you might get blowback for that, or like your peers might disagree with you. You stage a walkout, similar things. Like I think the sort of degree of the stakes can vary. I don't think everything has to be like super, super high stakes, high risk. But I think the question of performativity comes when, you know, you're doing something in a manner where there's absolutely no like, you know, we see people or express very empty opinions and call that activism, and it's like I don't really understand how that can fall into the same category of activism, where people are like producing art or music or writing or whatever, where their reputations are on their line, or like their, you know, their voice or their positions are on the line. So maybe that's something to think about, like what's at stake and what you're willing to put at stake.
Yeah, definitely. I honestly agree with all three of you, just saying that there is a difference between performing activism and being in activism, being active in just community and other political movements or social movements. So actually, Tiggy, I'm really happy that you brought up the point of just like performativity and what that actually entails at Yale's campus. Just because like through my personal experience of like noticing things or just seeing what certain people entail, it kind of becomes obvious when someone likes to take credit for other community members' work and or other organizations who have been there for a very long time or various years, actually doing the labor. So to that note of performativity, is there a difference between engaging in activism and performing activism? And if so, how do you actually kind of get the label of an activist? Is that something that is given to you, or more that you can claim for yourself?
That's a great question. I'm personally not convinced that activist is an identity that anyone should really claim. I'm like pretty personally averse to that idea, though I think others hold different opinions. I think like in the age that we live in, it's extremely easy to brand yourself as an activist, even if that entails like putting activist in your Instagram bio with like a fist emoji or something. And I think it's especially easy to do that in college and at Yale, when like, you know, you want to be cool and you want to be liked and you want to have friends. Like I certainly have had that experience in college where like I really felt like what I was known for politically was like the way that people wanted to be my friend or wanted to know me or thought that I had something interesting to say, which is actually rarely the case. But I think it's like a real thing that is not unique to, but certainly happens very often on college campuses specifically. And I think I'm more of the opinion that like activism is hardly an identity or something that you should claim but it's just like a way of moving through the world. And actually everything you do should be like in line with your values and whatever kind of ethical principles you hold. And whether you do that by showing up to a protest or writing a paper on like racial justice or like caring about your friends and loving them and trying to hold some kind of community. I think there are like so many ways to do that, and not all of them are classified as activism, nor should they be, do they need to be. And activism is like a loaded term. I'm sure we all have thoughts about it, and I think the way that I have tried to think about it is just like it's the way that it's who you are and the way that you live, and those behaviors aren't distinguished from any other kinds of behaviors that you do in your life with other people and on your own.
Yeah, I want to fully echo all of that. I think of being an activist as a practice and something that that kind of only exists in terms of doing the work. And so it doesn't end up being something that one claims for themselves, nor does it become something that we want to receive from others. But the hope is that if someone refers to you as an activist or an organizer, the only reason is because they've seen you doing the work and practicing it, as Janice was saying, in a myriad of ways in your life. So I think one thing that's important to think about is that it's something that will show up in terms of how you treat other people on a daily basis. And it shows up in terms of being willing to engage and, as Tiggy was saying, engage in ways where there are stakes. Because I think that also is something to name about activism versus other types of ways of being involved in movement building. Is you can be doing advocacy work, you can be doing work within institutions, but the thing that I think distinguishes organizing and activism is that it oftentimes means being in a position of opposition to another set of ideologies, to an institution, to a structure. And again, it ends up being not about having an identity as much as it is about developing a practice that you can have people recognize you as someone who cares more about the work than being recognized for the work. And it really is always thinking, okay, if no one was watching or if nobody was going to give any credit for what's being done in a particular situation, would I still show up? And how would I still be getting other people to be engaged as well?
Yeah, I think I would add that and I was definitely fell into this camp when I first came into college, thinking of activism as like a career. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, I want to be an activist. I think that can maybe just like blind you from what actually, like, what stakes there are, what is actually needed. I think if you have to insist that you're an activist, you're not really an activist. If or like, I agree with like what Joshua and Janice have said. Really, like, it's not about the label, and it's something that's like comes from the work. And like, if people identify you as an activist, it's because of the work that you're doing. I completely agree with that. And there are also, like it's been mentioned in the comments, there's many words. Like, there's activism, there's organizing, there's advocacy, there's resistance, which I think is powerful in and of itself. There's mobilizing, there's caring, which can be, like community caring. And I think that like, while there are different overlaps, there are like a lot of overlaps, and they can all be like under the umbrella of movement building, which is like incredible. People have like different roles. I think, activism is a bit separate, or what delineates activism, as Joshua put, is like something's at stake. And I guess that's how you can like check yourself.
Yeah, I like this idea of just like activism being an ongoing behavior without the necessity of recognition or validation in that sense. I think something that happens a lot on campus is just this like mentality of having like a punch card of being like, oh hey, like I attended 3 rallies or 3 protests, like can like can I actually have activists on my Instagram like profile now or something like that, you know? So this idea that like activism is an ongoing thing as opposed to just like a one and done situation is something that I think is personally very important to just uphold. At this point, Josh and Tiggy have also mentioned this, like the importance of stakes and having stakes in activism. And if you're committing to the work, there are some risks that are involved with it, whether it be opposition or from the institution or the environment or whatever it may be. But with stakes, it also tends to be very personal. And with that, there also has to be this navigation of just self-preservation, because with high points of civic engagement, it's very difficult to have to navigate your emotions at all times, especially when what you're rallying behind is very personal. So just what are some tips that you would give to students who are navigating like their emotions during periods of high civic engagement? And what would something you would tell students in terms of like self-preserving?
I think I'd say that it's okay to pick your fights, or pick your battles, or pick your struggles. Like there's no way, even focusing on one issue, like I focused on like, policing and justice, like within that one word, there's so many different ways to plug in, and there's so many like sub points. Like there's no way one person can be super active in everything that entails. And that's just one thing that's going on in the world. Like there's so many issues, there's so many social justice issues that demand our attention. And like, I personally, my biggest struggle has been feeling just overwhelmed by the amount of work that I feel like has to be done, and then feeling like I have to do it all, which is A, like unrealistic, and B, just like cripples me with that like sort of anxiety of I have to be doing more and more and more and more. And then so it makes what I'm doing like less quality. So I think just understanding that, hey, it's okay, like you've picked your one avenue, or the thing that you're doing, or whatever you're producing, or whatever you're focusing on for the moment. It's okay to like disengage from the other ones, take a back seat, learn, but like you don't need an active role in like every single thing.
Yeah, I think there is something really important to be said about having a vision for collective liberation that understands that you're playing one part in that, and your objective is to empower other folks to play their part as well. So I think it's very spot on what Tiggy was saying in terms of it can be incredibly overwhelming to recognize all the ways that oppression manifests in the world, all the stakes that are there for everyday, for people in their everyday experiences, and at the same time recognize your own limitations that just exist as being a person. And so trying to balance an awareness with understanding what you're able to do. And I think it's really also important to kind of recognize the variety of what ways that you can be doing the work. So I think there can oftentimes be pressure or an understanding of activism as only showing up at a protest. And I think if we are trying to think about building a collective movement, an intersectional movement, then that's already a way of engaging or a way of understanding engagement that leaves out a number of disabled folks, leaves out a number of people who have social anxiety. It leaves out groups of people that thinking about their experience is supposed to be part of what it means for all of us to get free. And so I think thinking about activism in that way is something that allows you to both think about your own well-being and know that part of the work is taking care of yourself, because the goal is for us to be in this for the long haul. And then also making sure that you're doing work in a way that allows people to have their own entry points. And Tiggy's point about the way that these issues intersect is really important, where you may be taking on policing as your angle, but the angle that you're coming from, the most important thing is to have an analysis where you're empowering other people to be fighting as well. So mass policing is bad for the environment. Mass policing is something that reinforces capitalism and the protection of private property. You know, these things overlap, and recognizing that you may have one entry point in, and that's great. And the biggest thing is making sure you're doing work that encourages and empowers other people to be doing work in the ways that they can.
I don't feel like I have that much to add to those amazing answers. I think I would like echo everything that was said and add that I think if we think that part of activism is building relationships and being in community with other people, then I think part of self-preservation is being able to ask people to take care of you when you need that and doing the same for the people in your community. And I think I felt really lucky at Yale that I had that, and I had friends who were not just my friends, but like my people and in community with me. Um, and I think that's like one of the most amazing things about college that I'm really missing now is like being a few blocks away from someone and having company and being able to be taken care of when you kind of are feeling a level of burnout. So I think that's important.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I really appreciate just the honesty that the three of y'all have just been showing with your answers. I think that being able to be so vulnerable is something that I deeply admire. So I really want to just, echo my appreciation for your participation right now. Tiggy, I know you mentioned that it's something that feels like the labor, there's so much of it, and it comes down to the individual having to do it all. But realistically, like that's just not feasible most of the time. It's not just like activism is not individual labor, but rather collective work, as Josh mentioned. And honestly, when it comes down to being a Yale student and also interacting with activism or interacting with community members who are performing or who are active in the community, sometimes it may be hard to like juggle your academics and also like your this need to be active in the community. So how do y'all go around just prioritizing your labor and prioritizing when you want to focus or when you can focus on academics and when your political or social lives take precedent or take lead, especially just because at the end of the day, as Yale students or as previous Yale students, the ultimate goal is to graduate, and it's very much hard to do so, or it's very much hard to like focus on academic work when you just feel like there's so much extra labor that has to be done at real time.
I feel like I'm gonna give a cop-out answer to this, but like I think there are always ways to combine the two. I don't think that's a cop-out. I think it's real, but it's not like full. It's not the answer you want, maybe. But I feel like for me, at least, I did prioritize school most of the time. Um, I really like school. I like to read and stuff or whatever. So like I found it very rewarding to be able to connect whatever I was trying to think about in the classroom with whatever is happening in the world. And there are always ways to make those connections, obviously. I think something like ethnic studies shows you that more than anything else, like AFAM and ERNM and other programs like WGSS and ANSTED are like, I think the most exemplary spaces where you can see why a particular political commitment is useful for intellectual work, or why a particular intellectual approach can be useful for thinking about politics. And I actually think this is something I came to embrace more during my last 2 years, especially my senior year when I was like grinding on my thesis. I felt like there were not enough hours in the day to write my thesis and like eat a meal. And I think I started to think harder about projects where I could combine like academic and intellectual work with some kind of political imaginary or commitment or interest. And a project that I had started working on my senior year with Dean Galvez and with another student in my year at ESOL was working on like a critical history map of Yale that we're actually still working on and trying to put out pretty soon, like on a digital platform. But I feel like that project was kind of an amalgamation of my interests in like intellectual work and political work, and trying to make something that people could actually use and like engage with and find like useful for thinking about how they navigate space and walk through campus and things. And I wish that I did more stuff like that while I was at Yale. I think like I was just kind of focusing on school and then doing stuff on the side and working at the ACC and stuff. And I think there are a lot of projects that would benefit from a mingling of those two kinds of pathways.
Yeah, I can build on this, I think, in part because I have spent time in a PhD program where your job is to be doing intellectual work that it's oftentimes suggested is supposed to be completely separate from organizing or activism. And as Janice was saying, I think I look to faculty members who are in American Studies and African American Studies. I look to ethnic studies. I look to ER&M for models of what it looks like to do intellectual or academic work that is actually in service of movements, and or doing work that is oriented towards serving you so you can do the work in the world that you want to do. So I think I, in undergrad, had a number of friends who were in the hard sciences, and oftentimes there was kind of the idea that their work was going to be completely separate from their organizing or their activism, or that because their academic work didn't so cleanly map onto their political work, that there was some type of divide. And I think it's really important to think about how movements involve full lives. And what that means is that you can have things that you're doing in the classroom that you're doing for a number of reasons. You know, for a lot of us, we're thinking about graduating and making sure that we can provide for ourselves and oftentimes for family, and thinking about how that's going to be possible, and at the same time still being able to have political commitment. So I think there's this idea that those things need to be separate, and as Janice was saying, I think the mingling when it's possible is so important. And when that's more challenging, knowing that those identities, it's not an either or. And I think that's something that it's sometimes feels like there is not models of, or it's hard to know how to do that. And part of it is that there are models, they're sometimes just hard to find, but to know that it's not ever an either or. And the one other thing I would say is that for me, when I was an undergrad, I definitely kind of went through a transition from being very much more involved in activism at the beginning of undergrad, and then moving towards doing academic work at the end of undergrad. And part of what that ended up being was my senior year, I was doing oral histories in St. Louis of activists from the 60s and the 70s. And I needed to reorient how I thought about what the work looks like. And so I think another piece, and the critical history of Yale like sounds incredible, and is an example of, I think, trying to think through the types of projects, work, consciousness raising that can be done both in and out of the classroom, and know that those things work together, that they're not at odds with one another.
Yeah, I think you guys have pretty much covered it. I'm very lucky that I'm an anthro major, so I can finesse any political view I want into a final project. And in fact, being a Black anthro major, I think, is also activism, just given anthro's history. But I think one thing I would maybe say for like, there will be moments where your major or your focus doesn't cleanly, like, you know, the intersections aren't as clear. And I think it's just about like, at least what's worked for me is like prioritizing, figuring out what you're prioritizing for a certain like amount of time. I'd do like a couple weeks at a time. Middle of the term is probably going to be like midterms. That's going to be my priority. But in the beginning of the term, like the way BSDY works is like, at least what we've planned out is like a bunch of our activities sort of like high level in the beginning and high level like sort of like in between midterm and finals. So people can just like have different priorities at different times, and it works out that we get everything that we want done, but people can also just like, you know, jump in and out as they need to for their schoolwork.
I think something I like that both of your responses also makes me think is like, yes, there are fields of study that maybe like either you don't need to connect it to your activism, or maybe you don't want to, and that's totally fine. Like, I feel like there should not be any pressure for every single thing that you do to be like the most rigorous, hardcore political thing in the world. Like, we should just do the things that we like and pursue things that we enjoy and be happy, and just like try and move through the world in a nice way where we care about people and do what we love.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that it's really important to like prioritize just like yourself as an individual when you're actually are balancing like either your sense of academia or your involvement in just like activism or engagement or resistance or whatever you want to call it. Just because like it's only you really know how best you operate. So like keeping in time with like your actual thoughts and your how your body's feeling is something that I think is very important. Just because at times it does seem like it could be the entire world on your shoulders. And that's a lot to carry on someone. So just being in tune with yourself is something that I think is super important in terms of like, as Josh mentioned, like ensuring that you are, you know, prioritizing yourself as a person to do the work. Something that y'all have mentioned in the past too, and at least like in the past of this conversation, is just a sense of risk and taking risks within a university context. So maybe can y'all talk about just like some drawbacks of activism at Yale, whether it be a short turnaround period in student groups or burnout for the individual, just something that comes with doing the work?
Yeah, I think just maybe just like linking it to the previous question, as much as I completely agree with everything everybody said, including myself, and like self-preservation, you know, I think there necessarily has to be moments where you're uncomfortable, at least if you're truly engaging in activism. And it's obviously a very difficult balance to draw. But yeah, like some of these moments are exactly what you asked about, Jorge, like moments of drawbacks or pushback from the university. I mean, things can range from just like awful interactions with the administration, you know, admin will not, you know, are interested in preserving the status quo. That's, I think, the function of administration. And so the moment they're pushed, the reaction is not going to be nice. It's not going to be great. Some people are meaner than others. That's not been fun. But you can also have like, you know, there are student groups here that have had actions that have like been more disruptive, and they've taken arrest, and like people, like you risk arrest, you risk like being ex-commed, which is like the board. I don't know if people know what ex-com is. So yeah, there's like disciplinary risk, there's like intrapersonal sort of like how people deal with you and how people react to you. I've only gotten one angry email from a student, and I've been like, okay, but it's not out of the question, I think.
Yeah, I think what you just said, the interpersonal stuff, actually was like the thing that stressed me out the most when I was at Yale. Like, I'm glad to be away from Yale just so that I never have to be perceived by anybody else. I think when you're involved in a lot of stuff, understandably, like, either people will say something about you, or maybe they hear about you before they actually meet you, which normally it maybe doesn't need to be so stressful, but when you put a bunch of like 18 to 21-year-olds in one place, and it can be kind of a drama situation socially. And I think the other thing is like even people who espouse certain political commitments, Tiggy, as you said, like, can be really mean. I think I've certainly had interactions that like stressed me out and where people were not so kind to each other. And I think especially because activism is so related to some kind of like social clout or some understanding of like how cool you are, how much you know, or how well read you are. I think that's a factor that I really found stressful while I was at Yale. And like, yeah, I think that's all.
I think one thing that I would add, and I think it's been talked about a little bit earlier, is that in figuring out the kinds of risks you're willing to take, or kind of realizing what the stakes might be and what that might mean for you, I think when you're weighing those kinds of decisions, you also always have to be weighing what type of support and care network do I have that's going to allow me to do this or make this choice. So I think the interpersonal piece is so important, because I know for me, doing some organizing work last year for a friend's mom who was detained and was being threatened with deportation, and doing organizing work here, it meant that we all had to figure out ways that we were going to be making phone calls and also making sure that everyone was fed, like making sure that people all, like, we were making sure that as we took shifts to call different Congress people, that we were confirming, okay, people are going to be able to get sleep, people are going to be able to, someone's gonna like grab pizza, like someone's going to make sure that we're taking care of each other on all cylinders. And I think the reason that ends up being really important in terms of figuring out what risks you're willing to take is because that's a conversation that you want to have with other people. Because one of the things that I think is most important in doing activism on a college campus is that different people are able to take different kinds of risks. People have different relationships to power. People have different privilege. I know for me, organizing in undergrad, it was a lot of conversations with white folks and figuring out if they were able to understand their ability to do things on a campus and do things in a city where policing and violence are racialized. And those conversations were really important because they're conversations that are going to translate outside of being on a college campus. And so that, I think for me, was something that I was only able to begin to have those conversations with people about kind of how we were going to do the work if I knew that I had some people who were committed to doing the work with me. And the one other thing I'll just add is that that was true for me in terms of students, and that also is true for me in terms of figuring out faculty members and people in the administration who were my allies, like through and through. And then also knowing that the institution itself was not necessarily on my side. And I'll say like 95% of the time was not on my side in the work that I was trying to do. But that didn't take anything away from the people who were inside the institution doing work to support me and doing work to make sure that students were able to actually agitate for the things that they needed and actually agitate for the communities they're a part of. So I think that's the other piece, is that there's a range of people who can support you in doing the work, even if they're not ever able to officially condone like a direct action or a thing that you're doing. There are people who want to support you because they believe in these movements too. And figuring out who those folks are separate from the institution writ large, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, maybe, yes, I think the general idea that everybody has different like relationships to power, different drawbacks is like a huge like takeaway. And I mean, I'm an international student, so like if I get arrested, that's it for me. Like you will not be hearing from me ever. So I mean, just communicating that, like I think these conversations that Josh was speaking about are so important. Everybody was going to have different situations. Everybody has like, you know, different personal drawbacks, and like the whole point of like building a collective movement is like letting people plug in, but also like creating that support network and like understanding everybody's different positions. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's I think it was Roderick Ferguson who said that once you challenge the status quo of a university, you're actually challenging society as a whole, just because American universities nationwide are direct reflections of society. And, you know, like historically, universities have oftentimes individualized complaints or individualized movements to specific individuals, just to like not actually see them as systemic problems or systemic issues. And for that reason, I think this issue of, or like this notion of collective work and working in unity is something that is extremely important and something extremely to uphold, whether it be unity amongst students or amongst other individuals in the community, such as like New Haven residents. So just to end on a positive note, because I am cognizant of time and I realize that we're running out of time, what are maybe or some examples of something that has kept you hopeful while doing or being engaged in the work that you are doing?
I'll just say as a graduate student or a graduate student, seeing the work that BSDY has been doing has been so inspirational and so encouraging. And
Joshua,
I
that's
think
so nice.
no, it really,
Tiggy's
really,
face
really
gave me
has.
joy and hope. Just
Because exactly to the point that Jorge was making, like and to what Rod Ferguson said, it's like work that is being done on college campuses to push back against the way that those institutions function and have functioned for a long period of time. Part of that is maintaining the status quo. And I think it's really important for students to be doing that kind of work. And BSDY has been incredible in seeing that work be done. And I think it's also really instructive for figuring out how to do that work elsewhere. So truly, that has been one of the things that has kept me very hopeful over the last weeks and months.
oh,
I'm a little bit emotional now. That was so nice. Maybe my one is like a specific moment that happened over the summer. I had just like gotten like proper heavily involved with BSDY, and we had a protest, and I was the only one in New Haven. So I was like the one doing most of the logistics, but I didn't have a lot of the relationships with like other community organizers that like older BSDY members had. So it was just me like cold calling a bunch of people being like, hi, you don't know me. Like, if you want to get involved in this, sure, but like no pressure. Cause they were also obviously doing so much work. And so I sort of went into it as this like random person. And it just ended up being like I pulled up and like so many people that didn't owe me anything, and like obviously like my visa status is like precarious, and like I was like, yeah, so like I know I'm leading this technically, but I can't get arrested, and like I don't want to ask too much of you, but like, you know, if things go badly, like I'm gonna have to leave. But like what ended up happening is so many people that barely knew me, barely owed me anything, just like showed up and were so like fired up like for the larger movement. Like I cried maybe 3 times in the whole thing, just out of just like feeling so inspired by other people. Like I learned so much that whole day, like literally more than I'd learned the month prior. I learned so much in that one day, just like interacting with everyone, learning from everyone, like following their lead. And it was one of the greatest spaces I have ever been a part of, even if we were the overarching goal was resisting something that's obviously very awful and oppressive and asking for it to be dismantled. What we were able to create like with each other was so magical. And like I know that like these communities and these pockets of like this magical resistance have been being created, but like there are being created right now, like across the country, across the world, and they're only like growing. I don't know, like videos of different protests or like people sitting or people chant. Like I just feel like it's something is growing in a very beautiful way, and it feels like really great to be even a small part of.
I think Tiggy might have froze there at the end for a little bit, but yeah, Janice.
Oh, I don't really feel like I have anything interesting to say to follow those two, but I feel like hearing you two talk really makes me miss being on a campus and like being around people. I miss that aspect of college a lot, and I found it hard to be in New York when like I feel like I moved here so that I could go to events all the time and like go to openings and talks and stuff in the city, and obviously you can't really do that right now. So it's been like a weird transition to move from a college campus to New York City, but not really have a lot of the stuff that New York City usually offers. I think what gives me hope. I think a drawback of student activism on college campuses is the short turnaround, like 4 years, and then sometimes institutional knowledge disappears. But I think a huge benefit of it is that every year you get a group of brand new students who are like really excited and eager to be involved in stuff. And I think seniors usually get jaded pretty quickly, speaking from personal experience myself. And like when I was during my junior and senior years, like I felt constantly re-energized by the new first years and the sophomores who were like, I just got here, I want to do it all. Like, how do I join this? How do I join that? What can I do? Like, how can I organize a protest? It's like pretty amazing. And I think this is like a larger trend of young people who have lived through wars and like horrible things about the United States, and maybe we'll see the planet die in our lifetimes. Like, young people are leading the charge, and it's young people who are like going to create a better world if there is ever going to be one. And people are being radicalized younger and younger. I think the high school that I went to when I was there was like extremely conservative, but I keep hearing about how students are creating like activism clubs and being much more progressive nowadays. And I think that's pretty cool. And so I think that's the thing that gives me hope, is like new energy that people who are younger than us are bringing to the table, and the way that that kind of energy can in turn revitalize or reinvigorate some of us.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all three of you. I think, you know, sometimes even in the darkest times, it's hard to remember how much hope there actually can be. But I think, you know, standing with one another is a good way of remembering all the great things that are to come and all the great things that will happen in our lifetimes, and for those who are going to be here after us. So I really want to thank the three panelists who are here today. I absolutely loved having this discussion. I think it's something that like made my day, and at a time when like this whole week has been stressful, and it's nice just interacting with y'all and seeing that like, you know, there are great and amazing people out there. So yeah, again, I really want to thank the three of y'all. I want to thank Tiggy and Dr. Karen Gosling, who had to leave early a little bit today, just for the work that they did in making this happen. And a huge shout out to also the student engagement team. A lot of them are here today, and I'm super happy that they're here. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for this. And the recording will be sent out to students and to y'all as well. So I hope you have a good rest of your night.